Welcome to Everything Pro Wrestling. Everything Pro Wrestling is a show by the fans, for the fans. And I am your host, Conrad Cushman, and we are here today with another retro review of WCW Halloween Havoc 1997. Thank you for listening to Everything Pro Wrestling. Now, before we get into our retro review of WCW Halloween Havoc 1997, do me a favor. It doesn't matter what platform you're listening on. Make sure you subscribe to the Everything Pro Wrestling podcast. You don't want to miss it. We have a show every week for you talking about pro wrestling, and I want to hear from you guys and get your feedback on the shows. Now that we've done that, let's get into the details of WCW Halloween Havoc 1997. Now, this event took place on October 26, 1997 for World Championship Wrestling. It was a pay-per-view from Las Vegas, Nevada at the MGM Grand Arena. The attendance was 12,457 people there, and it was broadcasted live. On commentary, we had Tony Schiavone, Mike Tenay, Bobby Heenan, and Dusty Rhodes. All right, the opening contest for this card was Yuji Nagata with Sonny Onoo versus the Ultimo Dragon. And let me just say this, Yuji Nagata is someone who still wrestles in New Japan today, and I think the fans will be very fond of him. He has put in a lot of work in pro wrestling, and he's an absolute pro. Now, going on and saying that, the Ultimo Dragon is someone that was amazing during this time period. He was one of WCW's better cruiserweights, and I'll even go as far to say that Ultimo Dragon had a really good run in WWE as well. And I thought they treated him pretty good when he was in that cruiserweight division. He's just a really good wrestler, and this match gets to showcase that. Now, during this match, you will notice one of the things Eric Bischoff talks about on every DVD or book he's ever been in is how he wanted WCW to have spontaneous action or events occurring at all times. And Raven's Flock, randomly in the middle of this match, joins the show through the crowd. So wrestling fans were all into it, looking to see who was in the crowd, and they joined in. And it was a really smart way to get Raven on the show, and he never had to wrestle. So kudos to Eric Bischoff for that. Now, in this match, Yuji Nagata ends up picking up the victory with an armbar. They talked about the Ultimo Dragon having some bone chips, and he was kind of injured throughout the match. And it was pretty cool to see that. Overall, I gave the match a grade of a C+, and I thought it was very well done. So after that, we're backstage, and we get a segment with Mark Madden, who wouldn't appear on WCW screens until later on, and he's with the television champion Disco Inferno, who is then interrupted by Jacqueline. And they are just going at it back and forth, and that's the setup to their match later on in the evening. We get to a bonus match after that with Gedo. That's right, the same Gedo who's in New Japan now, versus Chris Jericho. Now, if you don't know, Gedo, up until recently, was always seen beside Okada in New Japan Pro Wrestling. In this match, he is 28 years old, and he is facing off against Lionheart Chris Jericho. And watching this match, it was an okay match, good back and forth at the time for what Jericho was doing. At the end, he tried to do a top rope hurricanrana, and there was almost a crazy botch. Thank goodness nobody was hurt. It looked terrible. I'm sure there's YouTube clips of it everywhere. But in the end, Jericho winds up getting the victory with the Lion Tamer. Overall, I gave it a grade of a C, and thank goodness nobody was hurt during that botch. We take a break in the action once again to cut backstage to Mean Gene Okerlund, who was back there with Queen Debra McMichael. And she is back there talking about what she's going to do and who possibly could be facing her husband tonight. And that's Steve Mongo McMichael. And he comes into the scene as well. And they do the bickering husband-wife stuff back and forth. And they leave the scene like that. And that match will play out later on this card. We then get to the third match. And I have already dubbed this match of the night. And if you follow me on Twitter at EPW Show, you guys saw my video clips of this. I had to post some stuff while I was watching this match. That's how great this match is. We have, for the Cruiserweight Championship, title versus mask, Rey Mysterio Jr. versus the champion, Eddie Guerrero. This match had heat. Eddie Guerrero comes into the ring, and before they can even lock up, you hear Eddie sucks chants all over the place. The Lucha Libre style to the start of the match was great, and there was a lot of hard-hitting action. I felt like Rey Mysterio played his role as the babyface perfectly in this match, and Eddie Guerrero played his role as the heel perfectly, because he could have done a lot more things and got the crowd to pop a lot more, but he played his role as a heel to get Rey cheered, and he did a really good job in this. I'm going to highlight some of the better moves in the match, because if I did everything that I thought was great in this match, I'd be here all day. Now, one of my favorite moves to watch in this match is the crazy move where they have their hands interlocked and Rey Mysterio winds up jumping up to the top rope, and he does a flip, and he does a backflip over into a DDT on Eddie Guerrero. Freaking amazing. And that's right in that match, right during that time period, I noticed instantly these guys have 100% chemistry, maybe more, because these guys are on point and they're ready to go. Later on in the match, not even a few moves after, Rey Mysterio is in a submission hold and Eddie Guerrero begins to rip at the mask. And we see that often in today's Lucha Underground, but back then you didn't see that often on television. So I thought it was really cool that Eddie started trying to rip at his mask. Now, Eddie Guerrero puts Rey Mysterio in a Tree of Woe move where he's hanging upside down in the corner, and Eddie Guerrero attempts a baseball slide to Rey Mysterio's face, and Rey ends up sitting himself up, and, well, you know how the baseball slides work. He ends up going right in between the ring posts, and the boys were not feeling good after that. He makes his way to the floor, and Rey Mysterio does an amazing dive, and that's when I knew at that point they had the people in the palm of their hands. The crowd was going nuts for this match, and it wasn't even a crazy dive or anything. He just did a regular dive, but the fans were into it. Now, we get into the finish of the match, and it's freaking crazy. So Eddie Guerrero winds up getting Rey Mysterio on the top rope, and he puts him in a crucifix bomb, and he's basically going to jump off the second rope and put him into the powerbomb position. Well, when he goes to do the maneuver, everything's going fine until he throws him over his head, and Rey Mysterio flips into a Hurricanrana and ends up getting the pinfall. And 1, 2, 3, Rey Mysterio has won your Cruiserweight Championship. Now, after the match, Rey Mysterio basically is talking to the camera, and Eddie Guerrero attacks him immediately after getting Eddie Guerrero that heat. And as I said, this is my match of the night, but I gave this a grade of an A+. This is a classic match that I would recommend any wrestler training to be a pro wrestler or try to get in the WWE or any of the big league companies. You need to watch this match. Highly recommend it. After that amazing Cruiserweight title match, we go to a backstage segment that involved Hollywood Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff. They are backstage refusing to fight in the main event unless Sting is banned from the arena, and the WCW announce team does an excellent job getting over the fact that how can they ban Sting from the arena when they don't know where Sting is and what Sting's going to do. And that leads us into the fourth match, and they'll come back to that later on. But we get to the fourth match, which was Steve Mongo McMichael versus Alex Wright with Debra McMichael. So Alex Wright was Debra's surprise opponent for her husband. And during the match, we got some okay stuff in here, but it felt like a cool-down match. Nothing too exciting in the ring. Now, Goldberg ends up making a run-in to cost Mongo the match, and I have to point this out. The referee in the match was Charles Robinson, and he was put in a really tough spot in this because during Goldberg's spear, Alex Wright bumps into him, and he's supposed to be arguing with Debra, but it just doesn't work. And then after that, Goldberg does a jackhammer, and it takes way too long for the interference to occur, so Debra and him have to keep going back and forth, and it took way too long. But Goldberg ends up hitting the jackhammer, throwing Alex Wright on top of Mongo. 1, 2, 3, and Das Wonder Kid, Alex Wright, picks up another victory here. So we look at this, and something was up. So Goldberg goes to the outside afterwards, and he gets Mongo, who was part of the Chicago Bears that won the Super Bowl ring in the 80s. He gets his Super Bowl ring, and that was part of the deal. And Alex Wright ends up walking up next to Goldberg, and Goldberg knocks him out, starting to establish that Goldberg has no alliances, and he's going to dominate anyone in his way. Overall, I gave it a grade of a C. and it was an okay match. Nothing too crazy in here, and I wish that they didn't have the interference spot in the match. Next up, we have Disco Inferno versus Jacqueline. Now, at the time, Disco Inferno was the WCW television champion, and he's taking on Jacqueline. And I don't know about you guys, but I definitely think Jacqueline's tougher than the Disco Inferno when it comes to wrestling. So we get into the matchup, and during the entrances, as I said, Raven's Flock is out there, and one of the funny moments I noticed was Stevie Richards is holding up a sign that says Disco Inferno versus Jacqueline, girl versus girl. So that part made me chuckle a little bit. In this match, we get lots of stalling by the Disco Inferno, and it just made the match seem very long. And I get it, it's ring psychology, but way too much, and it went on for a long period of time. So in the match, Jackie ends up falling out of her attire, it looks like, and commentary plays it off. This is something I never noticed when I watched this as a kid. Dusty and everyone has like these awkward comments, and it gets really quiet. So if you go back and rewatch this, that's something you definitely want to pay attention to. The fans are behind Jacqueline, and she winds up getting the victory on Disco Inferno with a roll-up. She used all of her body weight. 1, 2, 3. Jacqueline picks up the deserved victory. Overall, I give it a grade of a C-, and I think the stalling hurt the match a little bit, but it made sense for wrestling psychology, so I'm okay with it. Match number 6 is for the WCW United States title, and we have Curt Hennig, who is the champion, versus Ric Flair. And if you remember our last retro review, which was the Fall Brawl, that's where Curt Hennig turned on the Four Horsemen. Well, it looks like the feud is still going on in this one. So we have Curt Hennig, who comes out, and he is wearing Ric Flair's robe with the title, and Ric Flair is not happy when he makes his entrance, and he comes out and he is ready to brawl immediately with Curt Hennig. Now, as a kid, I always felt like this feud kind of continued from their 1992-93 problems in the WWF. Go back and watch that eventually. They just have great chemistry, these two together, and I really liked this match. It was going pretty well for the most part. A weird thing I noticed in this match was Hennig really didn't show the belt, and it looked like the Cruiserweight title was used instead of the U.S. title in the match, and it's clear in the end of the match. They have the basic spots for both of them, with Curt Hennig doing his usual stuff, Ric Flair taking the back body drops to flip over the turnbuckle, everything else. It's exactly what you expected from it. Now, in the finish, Ric Flair has Curt Hennig in the Tree of Woe, and he uses the title to stomp in his face, but he ended up using the Cruiserweight title instead of the U.S. belt, so that felt kind of weird. But Ric Flair gets DQ'd for doing that, and he goes crazy on trying to beat down Curt Hennig, but the NWO comes out and pulls Curt Hennig out of the ring and saves him. So it looks like this feud is still not over yet. All right, guys, it's time to revisit Mean Gene, J.J. Dillon talking about Eric Bischoff and Hollywood Hulk Hogan's claims that they're not going to be performing in the main event. Well, J.J. Dillon ends up coming out and basically saying that he has a notarized contract from Eric Bischoff and Hollywood Hulk Hogan, and they are going to be performing in that ring no matter what. Bischoff comes out and does the whole back and forth. You can't make us do that. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to take over Nitro if Sting interferes in this match. Whatever. Then we get to the next match, which had a special guest referee of Larry Zbyszko, and this feud continues also from the Fall Brawl retro review that I did. We have Scott Hall with 6 versus Lex Luger and special guest ref Larry Zbyszko. So the real story here is with Hall and Zbyszko. They have a normal match that Luger and Hall would have. You see their basic usual moves, the fall away slam, the clothesline, steel plate forearm, usual stuff. Larry Zbyszko ends up back body dropping Hall out onto the floor, and Eric Bischoff runs out, and Larry Zbyszko knocks Eric Bischoff off the apron, which got a loud pop from the crowd. And the wrestling wasn't great in here, but they did everything right, it seemed like, to play to the crowd. After the match, it looks like Luger's going to have the advantage while Zbyszko's tussling and dealing with something else, and 6 kicks Luger in the back of the head. An outsider's edge, 1, 2, 3. Scott Hall gets the win. But Larry Zbyszko asks to see what happened on the instant replay, and the match is restarted. After it gets restarted, Lex Luger basically puts Scott Hall in the torture rack, and he's got him up. And before anything else could happen, 6 and Bischoff run in. 6 kicks Luger down, and then they go right to work on Larry Zbyszko as well. They try to beat him down, and nothing is really said. So who won the match? Nobody really knows. It kind of was left in one of those dusty finishes, as they call them. Overall, I give it a B- for how they played to the crowd and got everyone excited for certain spots, but it was an okay match. Our next match is a sudden death match, which is basically a last man standing match from what I observed from the rules, and we have the Macho Man Randy Savage, ooh yeah, versus DDP. And this is a really good feud. If you guys have never seen it, I highly recommend you go back and watch the entire feud for both of these guys. Good stuff. So Macho Man comes out with a really cool attire for Savage, basically rocking some stuff that looks like it goes back to the colors for Halloween Havoc and the Slim Jim that's everywhere. And his weight belt says snap into it. It's no wonder Vince got mad when he left, because there is Slim Jim plastered everywhere on this. Now, in the match, we have DDP. He's rocking the jeans and the taped up ribs, which is usually everyone's favorite DDP. We see a good brawl with these two. They're fighting into the crowd. They're using the stage props, the tombstones that are on there. They use cameras, dinner trays, anything. And Dusty Rhodes laughs so hard when he says somebody got hit with a dinner tray. I don't know why he always laughs when someone uses certain weapons, but it tickled Dusty, so it made me laugh too. Miss Elizabeth interferes a lot in this match, something you never saw from her when she was in the WWF as Miss Elizabeth, the sweet, innocent one. Well, in this match, she's pretty evil. And Kimberly ends up running out, and that's DDP's wife, and she pulls Miss Elizabeth's hair, and she brings her all the way to the back to keep her out of the match. Macho Man lands an elbow. We see the ref get knocked out, and DDP hits a diamond cutter, and both men fight really hard after that. The finish to the match comes when you see a low blow occur to Diamond Dallas Page, and he goes to the outside, and as he's making his way back up from the count, Savage is holding the ref, which I don't see why it would matter if there's no DQ, and a fake Sting comes out and hits DDP with a bat in the ribs. It is said to be that was Hollywood Hulk Hogan that did it. Looking at the boots, I highly doubt Hogan did this run-in. But overall, I thought it was a really good match. I gave it the grade of a B+. Excellent feud between these two. Highly recommend you go back and check it out once again. Now, after the match, Macho Man ends up stomping DDP, and DDP does the stretcher job. And while he's going up the ramp, Savage actually comes up to him and gets a few more shots in. So nothing too crazy to where he's knocking the stretcher over or anything that we're used to seeing in today's wrestling. But overall, I thought it was a really good opportunity to make this look realistic, and it did. So props to WCW for that one. It is now time. We have reached the main event. It is a steel cage match, non-title, of course. We will have Hollywood Hulk Hogan versus the Icon, Roddy Piper. Now, Piper's in WCW at the time, and they're playing a lot off of their feud from 1985. That's right before the big WrestleMania 1 tag match that they had. And it's an excellent feud if you guys haven't seen this as well. I like the build-up and playing off of the old WWF history in this. Now, Michael Buffer comes out, and he's the announcer, and it adds to that big match feel. If you watch old school boxing, you know who Michael Buffer is as an announcer, and he's one of the greatest of all time at it. Now, we get to this match, and this is going to sound really weird, but the match starts off, and Piper is biting Hogan on his butt and his back. Really weird to say that, but that's what occurred in the match. So Piper ends up biting Hogan, and he said he was going to bite chunks out of him. The announcers are going crazy for it. Piper and Hogan eventually leave the cage after slamming the door on each other's head, and Sting comes out. And I'm using finger quotes when I'm saying Sting every time, so just keep that in mind. Sting comes from the ramp, and he just stands up there and basically sends Hogan back. And that's when Hogan's trying to make his way out, like, oh, I'm going to leave, and Sting makes him come back to the ring. They battle back inside the cage, and during the fight, a second Sting shows up on the ramp. Very weird. Not sure how to take it. In the ring, Hogan whips Piper with his weight belt, and that was just a famous Hollywood Hogan thing. And Hogan attempts to exit the cage once again, but Sting comes up with his baseball bat and stops him and says, get back in the cage. And Piper and Hogan use the cage as a weapon. And in the match, Hogan winds up bleeding while he's on top of the cage fighting with Piper. Hogan gets back into the ring and hits 2 leg drops on Piper, and Piper kicks out, and Hogan can't believe it. So immediately after, what would a heel do? He calls for help. The Macho Man Randy Savage runs up to the top of the steel cage from the outside, and he's up at the very top of this cage. And he jumps off while Hogan is holding Piper, and Piper moves, and he delivers an axe handle to the Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And wow, I said that like Iron Sheik. He delivers an axe handle smash to Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Hogan's down. Piper throws Savage over the top rope, and then Piper puts Hogan in a sleeper hold. Before Savage can come in and make the save, they do the 3 arm drops for Hogan. 1, 2, 3. Hogan is knocked out. Piper wins via knockout, basically. Hogan, Bischoff, and Savage eventually get it back into the cage, and they start beating down Roddy Piper. And during the middle of the beatdown, they cuff him to the cage, basically have both of his arms hooked up to the top. They're beating him with the belt, the weight belt again, and Piper is taking brutal damage in this. And they're yelling, "Will anyone come out to help?" And what do you know? A crazy fan ends up running into the cage. I don't know. I thought maybe it was someone who was a plant, but this guy ran in, and when he was starting to climb over, you could tell that he was not used to it. So instantly, Savage and Hogan put a beat down on him. WCW security rushes in there to get the guy out. Hogan and Savage give him a brutal beatdown for a fan. And in the end, we go off the air with the NWO basically celebrating, and it's kind of like Hogan in the 80s. Hogan had to do his pose down at the end of every WWF pay-per-view. Well, in WCW, Hogan and the NWO had to always get the final laugh and the final beatdown. Well, guys, we reached the end of this retro review, and overall, I give the show a grade of a B. WCW really put on a good show here, and this is why it's in its prime at this time. Now, do me a favor and make sure you guys stick around to check out all of our retro reviews by subscribing to whatever platform you're listening to us on right now. Thank you so much for supporting the Everything Pro Wrestling podcast. If you're enjoying the shows, do me a favor. Give us a follow on Twitter and make sure you drop us a line or a reply at EPW Show. I greatly appreciate it, and I'd love to hear from anyone who listens to the show with some feedback. Thank you for listening to the Everything Pro Wrestling podcast. We are out, and thank you guys for being just too sweet.